To the Vipers, Art Jenkins was just a trembling 72-year-old plumber, an easy target. They kicked in his door, smashed his granddaughter's photo, and left him bleeding on the concrete. They laughed as they walked away, thinking they had broken him. They were wrong. In the silence of the empty shop, Art's shaking hands went deadly still. The plumber didn't stand up. The tunnel rat did. He gripped his rusted wrench not as a tool, but as a weapon of war. The Vipers didn't just rob a shop. They just woke up the devil. The price of peace. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the grime of 1,000 city exhaust pipes, cast long, weary shadows across Arthur Jenkins's small, cluttered workshop. A faint smell of rust, solder, and stale tea hung in the air, a familiar comfort for a man whose life had been measured in leaky faucets and clogged drains. Art, his back a permanent question mark against the relentless march of age, was meticulously oiling a stubborn pipe wrench, his gnarled fingers moving with an economy born of decades of repetitive motion. At 72, his body was a betrayal, a collection of aches and creaks, but his mind, a quiet, intricate mechanism, remained remarkably sharp. He wore faded blue overalls, stained with the indelible history of his trade, and his wispy gray hair clung precariously to his scalp like the last autumn leaves. The piece, brittle and hard-won, shattered without warning. A violent bang rattled the workshop door off its hinges, sending a shower of plaster dust onto Art's ancient workbench. He didn't jump, didn't flinch. Instead, his hands, still cradling the wrench, paused, his eyes, the color of faded denim, slowly lifting. 3 figures filled the doorway, blocking out the last vestiges of daylight, their hulking forms silhouetted against the urban twilight. The leader, a block of muscle with a face like a badly carved pumpkin, smirked, revealing a missing front tooth. He wore a patched leather vest over a grimy t-shirt, his arms a roadmap of faded tattoos. Well, he rumbled, his voice a gravelly rasp. If it ain't ol' Artie Jenkins, the sewer king. This was Knuckles, a low-ranking enforcer for the Vipers, a gang that had been slowly tightening its grip on this neglected corner of the city. Beside him, Shiv, a wiry, twitchy man whose eyes darted like startled mice, fingered the hilt of a small blade tucked into his belt. The third, a hulking brute named Bully, whose intellect seemed to be directly proportional to his girth, simply grinned, a predatory gleam in his dull eyes. To what do I owe the pleasure? Art's voice, a dry whisper, held no tremor, no fear. It was simply weary. Knuckles took a step inside, his heavy boots scuffing the concrete floor. Pleasure, he chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. Ain't no pleasure in business, Artie. We're here about your protection. Art set the wrench down, its clang echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly oppressive silence. Protection from what? Shiv snickered. From us, Gramps, and anyone else who might get ideas about your fancy little shop. His eyes flicked around the cramped space, landing on Art's antique toolbox, then on a collection of vintage plumbing fixtures. His gaze was acquisitive, dismissive. I pay my taxes. I don't cause trouble. Art folded his arms across his chest, a gesture of defiance utterly at odds with his slight frame. Knuckles' smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. Taxes don't keep the wolves away, old man. We do. And for that, there's a fee. A weekly fee. We figured 100 a week for a respectable businessman like yourself. 100 a week. It was an impossible sum. Art's meager earnings barely covered his rent and the escalating price of pills for his arthritis. His retirement fund, carefully hoarded over half a century, was less a fund and more a fragile, shrinking puddle. I can't afford that. The words were plain, simple, undeniable. Knuckles took another step, closing the distance between them. His breath, stale with cheap beer and nicotine, washed over Art. Funny that, he sneered. Most folks find a way to afford it, or they find their shop burned down, or themselves, unable to work. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You're a plumber, Artie. Hard to plumb when your hands are broken, ain't it? Art said nothing, merely looked at Knuckles, his gaze unervingly steady. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was more like assessment, as if he were evaluating a faulty pipe, trying to find the source of the blockage. Knuckles, unnerved by the lack of reaction, lashed out. A sudden, brutal shove sent Art stumbling backward, tripping over a coil of copper tubing. He landed hard on the concrete, a dull thud echoing through the workshop. A gasp of pain escaped his lips, quickly suppressed. "Listen, old man," Bully growled, his thick fingers grabbing Art's faded overalls and hauling him roughly to his feet. "You gotta understand how this works. We offer peace. You pay for it. Simple. And if I don't?" Art managed, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip where it had caught on a tooth during the fall. Knuckles laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Then we take it, and you'll wish you'd paid." He nodded to Shiv. "Check his pockets, little man. See if he's got any loose change." Shiv, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight, began rifling through Art's overalls, pulling out a crumpled handkerchief, a few rusty screws, and a wallet thin as a communion wafer. He flipped it open, revealing a handful of bills. $50, boss, and a picture of some old dame. He scoffed, tossing the wallet back onto Art's chest. Knuckles rolled his eyes. "That's it? 50? You're telling me a man who's been fixing toilets for 50 years only has $50? He grabbed Art by the collar, slamming him against the workbench. The vise on the bench, loose, spun with a squeak. "Where's the rest, you old miser? We know you got something put away. Everyone does." Art's head lolled to the side, his breath coming in shallow gasps. It's in the bank. My retirement." The words were forced out, each syllable a struggle. "The bank, huh?" Knuckles pulled him back, then pushed him forward again, Art's skull bouncing against a shelf of pipe fittings. A sharp pain bloomed behind his right temple. "And how do we get that out? ATM? Card?" Art gasped, his vision blurring. "In the biscuit tin. Under the sink." Knuckles' eyes narrowed. "Biscuit tin? You gotta be kidding me." He gestured to Bully. "Go on, big man. Find the biscuit tin." While Bully lumbered towards the sink, Knuckles held Art firmly, twisting his arm behind his back. Art let out a low moan, his face contorting in pain. Shiv, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying himself, kicking at a stack of old plumbing manuals. Bully returned moments later, holding a battered tin emblazoned with a faded image of Scottish Highlands. He rattled it, a faint clinking sound. He popped it open. Inside, beneath a layer of old receipts and expired coupons, lay a single debit card and a small, folded piece of paper. "Bingo!" Bully grunted, holding them up. Knuckles snatched them. He unfolded the paper, a hand-scrawled pin visible. "All right, Artie. This ain't so bad, is it?" Knuckles forced a jovial tone, though his grip on Art's arm remained bone-crushingly tight. "You just paid your first month's protection. Consider it a down payment. We'll be back next week for the rest." He released Art abruptly, sending him sprawling to the floor again. Art lay there, gasping, his body aching, a dull throb in his head. Blood, warm and slick, trickled down his temple, staining his gray hair. He watched through half-closed lids as Knuckles and Bully departed, the leader still clutching his debit card and the precious pin. Shiv, unable to resist a final act of petty cruelty, kicked over a bucket of rusty bolts, sending them scattering across the floor with a metallic clatter. "See you next week, Grandpa," Knuckles called out, his voice already fading as they stomped out into the street, their laughter echoing hollowly in the sudden, cavernous silence of the workshop. Art lay motionless for a long moment, the only sounds the drip of a leaky faucet and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He pushed himself up slowly, painfully, his hands trembling as he braced himself against the workbench. He touched his temple, his fingers coming away scarlet. He looked at the blood, then at the empty doorway, where the last of the sunlight now bled into a bruised orange twilight. The weariness that had etched itself into his every line and wrinkle seemed to recede, replaced by an unnerving stillness. His eyes, no longer faded denim, seemed to deepen, the blue hardening into something cold, ancient, like glacial ice. A faint, almost imperceptible spark ignited in their depths, a glint that had nothing to do with pain or fear, and everything to do with a long-forgotten memory. They had stolen his retirement. He took their lives. The metallic tang of his own blood was the first thing Art truly registered. He pressed a wadded shop rag to his temple, the crimson blossoming across the worn fabric like a morbid flower. His workshop, usually a sanctuary of grease and industry, now felt like a tomb, its silence amplifying the throb behind his eyes. He should call someone. The police. It was the sensible thing, the right thing to do. He stumbled to the cracked plastic landline on the workbench, his fingers fumbling with the rotary dial. A lifetime of etched incivility demanded he report the crime, yet a bitter premonition was already tightening its cold grip around his chest. The Da Nang precinct was less a bastion of law and order and more a monument to civic exhaustion. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting sickly shadows on the peeling paint of the walls. A half-eaten plate of banh mi sat congealing on a cluttered desk, testament to a missed lunch. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale coffee and resignation. Art, his face bruised, a bandage clumsy on his temple, recounted the attack to a young officer whose eyes, dulled by countless similar stories, barely met his. Officer Pham, his name tag read, a man no older than Art's own grandson would have been. Vipers, you say? Pham scribbled a few desultory notes, his pen scratching against the cheap paper. His voice was flat, devoid of real interest. We've had reports. They beat me, stole my retirement, my pension fund. Art insisted, the words tasting like ash. They have my debit card, my PIN. They said they'd be back. Pham leaned back in his chair, a subtle shift in his posture that Art, with his lifetime of observing human tells, recognized immediately. It wasn't indifference. It was fear, or perhaps something worse, complicity through inaction. Mr. Nguyen, Da Nang has its challenges. We're understaffed. These things, they happen. We'll file a report, of course. We'll look into it. The empty reassurances hung in the air, hollow as a drum. Change your PIN, cancel the card. That's the best you can do right now. Art stared at him, a chill seeping into his bones. The system, the very institution designed to protect, was a sieve. The Vipers, he realized with stark clarity, weren't just criminals. They were a force of nature, unchecked, unchallenged. The law here was a suggestion, easily ignored by those with enough muscle and enough silent agreement from those meant to uphold it. He felt the last vestiges of his faith in order crumble like dry earth. He walked out of the precinct, the afternoon sun a brutal glare after the dim interior. He felt exposed, vulnerable, a solitary figure adrift in a city that had once been his home, his sanctuary. The workshop offered no comfort. He sat on his rickety stool, staring at the scattered bolts, the lingering memory of Shiv's casual malice. His hands, still trembling slightly, found the cool, smooth wood of an old carving knife, a tool he hadn't used in years. His fingers traced the familiar curve of the blade, a strange comfort in its inert potential. His gaze drifted to a small, framed photograph tucked amidst the tools on a shelf, a beacon of light in the dusty chaos. It was Maya, his granddaughter. Her smile, wide and unburdened, radiated pure joy, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she clutched a brightly colored kite on a sunny beach. The image was a promise, a reason. She was the anchor that kept him tethered to this quiet, unassuming life he had built. A shadow fell across the workshop entrance. Art's head snapped up. It was too soon for the Vipers, he thought, a tremor of unease snaking up his spine. But the silhouette was different. Taller, broader, and the aura it exuded was not crude thuggery, but something colder, more calculated. A man stepped into the workshop, eclipsing the fading light. He was a human monolith, built of dense muscle and sharp angles, his black t-shirt straining across a barrel chest. An intricate tattoo of a stylized viper coiled up his neck and disappeared beneath his hairline. His face was a landscape of harsh plains, with a prominent scar slicing through one eyebrow, giving his dark eyes an unervingly asymmetrical intensity. He moved with a predatory grace, a coiled spring ready to unleash. This was not Knuckles. This was the spider, not the web spinner. Art Nguyen. The voice was a low rumble, abrasive as grinding stone. They call me Jigsaw. He glanced around the workshop, his gaze lingering on the scattered tools, the faint sheen of oil on the concrete floor. Our mutual friends said you might be difficult. Art pushed himself to his feet, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. They took everything, he said, his voice raspy. I went to the police. Jigsaw let out a short, humorless bark of laughter. The police? That's quaint, Grandpa, and irrelevant. Our cut isn't based on your available funds. It's based on our needs. And our needs have increased. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, branded USB stick. You'll be setting up a direct deposit. 1,000 USD every week. Starting Monday. Art shook his head, desperation clawing at his throat. I don't have it. My pension, it's gone. What little was left, they took. I'm a simple mechanic. I don't make that kind of money. Jigsaw took a step closer, his shadow engulfing Art. His dark eyes fixed on the framed photo of Maya on the shelf. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, revealing a gap where a tooth should have been. A pretty little thing, he murmured, his gaze still on the photograph. Is she yours? Your daughter. My granddaughter, Art managed, his voice barely a whisper. A cold dread, far deeper than any physical fear, began to coil inside him. Jigsaw reached out a massive hand, his fingers surprisingly delicate as they plucked the framed photo from the shelf. He turned it over in his palm, admiring Maya's beaming face. Such a lovely smile. Wouldn't want anything to happen to that, would we? Art's breath caught in his throat. Don't you dare, he rasped, his eyes widening. A flicker of malicious amusement danced in Jigsaw's eyes. Without a word, he lifted the frame, then brought it down with casual, brutal force against the edge of the workbench. The glass shattered with a sharp report, spraying fragments across the floor. Maya's smiling face was instantly scarred by a jagged crack, her innocent joy fragmented, distorted. A warning, old man, Jigsaw said, dropping the broken frame back onto the shelf. Next time, it won't be glass. His voice dropped to a guttural whisper. It'll be bone. Hers. The words hung in the air, a poisonous miasma. Art didn't speak. He couldn't. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. The pain from his temple, the humiliation at the precinct, the fear of the vipers, it all vanished, consumed by a raging inferno that erupted within him. He looked at the broken picture, at the shattered innocence of Maya's smile. Then, his eyes, once faded and weary, snapped up to meet Jigsaw's. The blue was no longer glacial. It was a searing, Arctic blaze, a profound and terrifying coldness that promised only absolute desolation. The tremor in his hands stilled. His breathing deepened, slowed, becoming unnervingly quiet. A lifetime of peace, of quiet suffering, of turning the other cheek, evaporated in that instant. The thin veneer of the gentle old man, the harmless mechanic, was not just cracked. It was utterly obliterated. What remained beneath was something ancient, something honed in the crucible of war, something that had long been dormant, sleeping soundly beneath layers of memory and regret. The whisper of the past was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, and it was deafening. He looked at Jigsaw, not with fear, but with a gaze that promised an unfathomable reckoning. The gangster, for all his brutal confidence, seemed to falter, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his own hardened eyes, a predator sensing a new kind of prey. Monday, Jigsaw repeated, his voice less assured this time. He took one last, assessing look at Art, then turned and strode out, his heavy boots crunching faintly on the shattered glass. Art stood motionless amidst the debris, the scent of fresh blood and shattered glass thick in the air. He didn't look at the broken photo anymore. His gaze was fixed on the empty doorway, where the last light of day bled into a bruised twilight. His hands, still steady, slowly curled into fists. The gentle mechanic was gone. In his place stood a sentinel, awakened, terrifyingly resolute. And the ghost, the one he had tried to bury for 50 years, was finally free. The grease under Art's fingernails had vanished, replaced by the faint scent of antiseptic and old paper. The workshop, once a sanctuary of oil and metal, had transformed. Maps, brittle with age and new, brightly colored tourist guides, were spread across his workbench. His fingers, no longer caressing engine parts, traced arterial lines on faded schematics, old utility tunnels, disused sewer networks, the forgotten veins beneath Da Nang's bustling skin. A laptop hummed quietly in the corner, displaying satellite imagery alongside archival photographs of the city's sprawl decades ago. He cross-referenced, he annotated, he absorbed. He worked with a quiet intensity that was almost frightening to behold. His eyes, once soft pools of gentle melancholy, now held a sharp, calculating glint. He wasn't just looking at the Viper's known territories. He was dissecting their very foundation, their lifelines. Supply routes, escape paths, fallback positions. He saw them not as static points on a map, but as fluid movements within a living, breathing organism. He sought the chinks in the city's armor, the dark places where light never reached, where the Vipers, like all vermin, would seek refuge. His primary focus, however, was on the hidden world beneath the asphalt. Da Nang, a city rebuilt and redeveloped countless times, possessed an archaic underbelly. Forgotten utility tunnels, remnants of French colonial infrastructure, disused subway lines never fully commissioned, sprawling sewer systems that snaked like a monstrous, subterranean labyrinth. These were the city's true secret passages, its blind spots. He found his first entrance behind a crumbling, abandoned market stall on the city's outskirts. A rusted manhole cover, overgrown with weeds, yielded with a groan under the pry bar he carried. The air that rushed up to greet him was thick and cold, smelling of damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. He clicked on his headlamp, its beam cutting a stark path through the inky blackness. The descent was steep, treacherous. The concrete steps were slick with moisture, covered in a slimy film of moss and mold. As his boots met the uneven floor of the tunnel, a shiver, not of cold, ran down his spine. The space was cramped, the air heavy and still. A disorienting flash of memory hit him, sharp and sudden. The cloying weight of mud, the metallic tang of fear in his own throat, the echoing thud of distant artillery. He blinked, shaking his head. It was just the darkness, the unfamiliarity. He told himself it was. He moved slowly, methodically, his senses heightened. Every drip, every scuttle of unseen life, was noted. He charted the passages in his mind, mapping their intersections, their dead ends, their forgotten exits. He found the deeper levels, the older tunnels, where the air was even heavier, the silence more profound. Here, the concrete gave way to rough-hewn stone, the scent of damp earth more pervasive. Another flash, more vivid this time. A stifling tightness around his chest, the acrid smell of spent gunpowder mingling with the damp earth. A distant, muffled scream, quickly cut short, seemed to reverberate not from the tunnel walls but from deep within his own skull. He stopped, pressing his hands against his temples, trying to push the phantom sound away. His breath hitched. It was just the sound of the wind through a distant grate, he rationalized. But his hands trembled. Up above, Maya had noticed the change. The gentle rhythm of Art's life had been shattered, and in its place was a frantic, almost obsessive energy. He still worked at the shop, but his movements were sharper, his gaze distant. Then came the nocturnal disappearances. She'd wake to an empty bed, the faint scent of his aftershave still lingering, only for him to return hours later, smelling of damp earth and something indefinable, his eyes shadowed but burning with a renewed, terrifying intensity. She watched him, her concern a tight knot in her chest. The old Art was fading, replaced by a ghost of a man she didn't know, a ghost she suspected she shouldn't know. His silence, once a comfort, had become a wall. One night, after he'd slipped out, she found herself drawn to his study. It was a small, Spartan room usually kept meticulously tidy. But tonight, a drawer in his old wooden desk, usually locked, was ajar. Her heart pounded. She knew she shouldn't, but the pull was irresistible. She remembered the photo, the broken glass. Something had shifted fundamentally within him. She gently pulled open the drawer. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of old tax documents and a few faded postcards, was an old sealed military record box. It was a sturdy, olive-green metal box, about the size of a shoebox, its edges worn, but its lock still intact, rusted shut. Her fingers traced the raised lettering on the lid. It was stark, official. Classified, Operation Ghost Rat, Da Nang. Below that, a faded, almost illegible handwritten notation, property of the United States Army, Vietnam. Restricted access. Her breath caught. Ghost Rat. The name itself sent a chill through her. What was this? And why had Art, the quiet mechanic, kept such a thing? The lock was rusted, but not impenetrable. She found an old screwdriver on his desk, and with a series of careful prying motions, the brittle metal groaned, then snapped. The lid sprang open. Inside, there was a single file. No photographs, no documents, no maps. Just a thin, manila folder. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out, her eyes scanning the faded label on the front. Operation Ghost Rat, Personnel File, 1968 to 1970. She opened it. The folder was empty. Completely, utterly blank. Not a single piece of paper, no handwritten notes, no photographs, no classified reports. Just the pristine, untainted interior of a file folder. Maya stared, her mind racing. A classified operation. A box sealed for over 50 years. And nothing inside. It was impossible. It was a phantom, an erasure. A cold dread seeped into her bones. The ghost wasn't just in Da Nang. It was in Art, and someone somewhere had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury it. What kind of secret was so dangerous, so volatile, that it had to be scrubbed from existence? And what had just been reawakened? The humid Da Nang night clung to Art like a shroud, a second skin of sweat and memory. He moved through it, not like a man of 70, but like a whisper carried on the monsoon breeze. Years had etched lines on his face and slowed his walk in the daylight, but beneath the city, in its hidden veins and arteries, Art was home. This wasn't just Da Nang to him. It was a complex organism, its forgotten passages and choked conduits as familiar as the back of his own calloused hand. He was the ghost the city hadn't realized still haunted its depths. Tonight, his target was a nondescript shophouse in an alley off Bakdang Street, fronted by a bustling noodle stall by day, but by night, a hardened shell concealing the Viper's primary distribution hub. Art didn't need blueprints. He had a lifetime of observation, a photographic memory for every sewer grate, every storm drain, every forgotten utility tunnel laid down by French colonials and later fortified by American engineers. He knew where the old city bled into the new, where power lines were vulnerable, and where water mains ran just inches from crumbling brickwork. His toolkit was sparse. A multi-tool, a specialized pipe wrench, a small, dark satchel containing 2 items that would turn the Viper's empire into a poison chalice. His eyes, though shadowed by age, were sharp, missing nothing. He passed beneath a grimy air conditioning unit, its rhythmic drip of familiar percussion, then slipped through a rusty grate into the suffocating embrace of the city's underworld. The air was thick with the stench of stagnant water, decaying refuse, and something else, a metallic tang of old secrets that resonated deep within him. He navigated the cramped tunnels with practiced ease, his movements economical, silent. Each step was a defiance against time, against the weight of a past he had tried to bury. But Maya had opened that box, and the emptiness inside had been a scream. Now Art was answering. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about a reawakening, a promise made decades ago, a shadow stepping out of the light. He found the main conduit that ran beneath the shophouse, a cramped, damp crawlspace that widened into a maintenance shaft. From here, he could reach the building's antiquated power grid and, more importantly, the storage basement. A quick, precise cut to the reinforced cable, not severing it entirely, but disrupting a critical phase, plunging the entire building into sudden, disorienting darkness. Inside, chaos erupted. Shouts, the clatter of dropped objects, the thud of bodies bumping into each other. Art allowed himself a grim, fleeting satisfaction. First strike. He moved swiftly like a surgeon. The basement was his next priority. He located the old, corroded iron pipe that fed water into the building, a remnant of a colonial-era system long abandoned but still pressurized. A series of careful, deliberate turns with his specialized wrench, a subtle manipulation that would cause a slow, insidious leak, gradually widening under pressure. It wouldn't burst immediately, but by morning, the basement, a vital storage area for the Viper's supply, would be a festering pool, their product ruined by moisture and contamination, water, an element of life, becoming an agent of destruction. Then, the contents of his satchel. Not just destruction, but confusion. He reached a ventilation shaft that snaked directly into the basement. With precise movements, he attached a small, specialized aerosol device to the vent. It released a nearly odorless, tasteless compound, a potent but unstable catalyst designed to accelerate the degradation of organic compounds, especially certain synthetic drugs. It wouldn't destroy them instantly, but would subtly alter their molecular structure, rendering them inert, even toxic, over the next few hours. The Vipers wouldn't know until their product hit the streets, causing widespread sickness, or simply failed to deliver the promised high. Art retreated as silently as he had arrived, leaving behind not a trace of his presence, only the creeping dread of unseen sabotage. Inside the shophouse, the mood had curdled from panic to pure, venomous rage. The lights were back on, flickering erratically, but the damage was done. Downstairs, the basement was beginning its slow, disgusting transformation into a bog. The Viper's boss, a man known only as the Serpent, paced his office like a caged tiger, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Who?" the Serpent hissed, slamming a fist onto his polished desk. "Who would dare?" His lieutenants, a motley collection of street-hardened thugs and ambitious young men, shifted uneasily. "We thought a rival, boss," one ventured, a man named Tuan, sweat beading on his brow. "The Dragon Clan's been making noise." "The Dragon Clan hits hard, Tuan," the Serpent snarled, his eyes narrowing to slits. "They don't cut power and flood basements like some damn ghost. This is surgical, disrespectful." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their faces, searching for cracks. "Someone here is talking. Someone let them in." The accusation hung heavy in the air, sparking immediate, raw animosity. Eyes darted, suspicion already festering. This wasn't a rival gang's work. It felt too intimate, too targeted. Paranoia, like a venomous snake, began to coil around their ranks. Hours later, long after Art had cleaned the sweat and grit from his body, and the city had settled into the deceptive quiet of late night, a lone Viper guard, Quan, patrolled a narrow, winding alley a few blocks from the sabotaged shophouse. The air was thick with the smell of jasmine and exhaust fumes. He clutched his pistol a little tighter, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. The events of the night had shaken everyone. A rustle in the shadows ahead, too deliberate for a stray cat. Quan froze, his heart thudding against his ribs. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice a little too shaky. The shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness, coalescing into a figure. It wasn't tall or hulking, but it moved with an impossible, almost ethereal grace. An old man, Quan registered vaguely, cloaked in the night, his face obscured by the deep shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. But there was something in the way he moved, something in the cold intensity of his gaze, that sent a jolt of primal fear through Quan. Quan raised his pistol, but before he could squeeze the trigger, the figure was on him. Not a punch, not a kick, but a blur of motion. A grip like steel on his wrist, a twisting force that disarmed him in an instant, his pistol clattering harmlessly to the grimy pavement. Then, a quick, precise pressure point manipulation, and Quan's world dissolved into a dizzying whirl of disorientation. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out, his mind a fog. He felt a sharp, burning sensation on his forearm, then nothing but the swirling blackness at the edges of his vision. Minutes later, a fellow patrolman found Quan crumpled in the alley, his eyes glazed, his body shaking uncontrollably. His uniform was intact, no signs of a struggle beyond the dislocated shoulder and the strange, numb feeling in his limbs. But on the grimy brick wall beside him, crudely carved with a sharp object, illuminated by the flickering street lamp, was a message that chilled them to the bone, echoing a whispered terror from another time, another war. "The rat remembers." Silas Thorne ran a manicured thumb along the spine of the report, his gaze dissecting the words like a surgeon's scalpel. "The rat remembers," he murmured, the phrase lingering in the opulent silence of his study. His enforcers, hulking men who usually exuded an aura of casual menace, shifted uncomfortably. Quan, their muscle, was still in the ICU, incoherent babblings of darkness, and the ghost, punctuated by bouts of catatonia. This wasn't a standard turf war. It was something ancient and far more predatory. "Find me everything on this rat," Silas commanded, his voice a low hum that somehow conveyed more menace than a shout. "Who is he? Where did he come from?" What does he want? One of his lieutenants, a sharp-featured woman named Kiana, nodded. Our street sources are drawing blanks, Silas. No whispers, no history. He materialized out of thin air. Then dig deeper, Silas countered, his eyes glinting with a dangerous curiosity. Past the street. Go to the dark web, the archives, the forgotten corners. This wasn't a warning, Kiana. It was a declaration. His tech team, a collection of pale, genius-level hackers, worked in a separate sterile annex beneath Silas's penthouse. They started with Art's last known associates, his business dealings, his family. The usual digital breadcrumbs led them down innocuous paths. A small, struggling antiques shop, a handful of local community donations, a pension fund. Then they hit the wall, Art's military records. They were almost entirely blank. A basic entry, discharge papers, but the service record itself, the details of his deployment, his unit, his commendations, all redacted, classified. An empty slate where there should have been a history. Silas, one of the hackers, a gaunt young man named Zero, called out, his voice a surprising tremor of excitement. This is unusual. Not just sealed, but almost wiped. Like he never existed. Silas walked in, his expensive leather shoes silent on the polished concrete. He peered at the screen, a faint frown creasing his brow. A ghost, he mused. That explains the disappearing act. Someone doesn't want his past known. Zero, still tracing digital shadows, clicked through a rabbit hole of obscure forums. This is a long shot, but I found a thread on a vintage war memorabilia site, not about collecting but stories, anomalies, unofficial histories. He scrolled down, past grainy photos and crackling audio clips. There's a recurring mention of a specific type of operative from Vietnam. Code name, Tunnel Rats. Silas leaned closer, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Tell me. They were specialists, Zero explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up old documents, declassified reports, and even personal accounts, sent into the Viet Cong tunnel networks. Close-quarters combat, often in pitch darkness, miles beneath the jungle floor. Not just combat, but demolition, intelligence gathering. Psychologically brutal work. Most didn't come back sane. Some were even disappeared after the war, their records scrubbed for what they knew or what they became. He pointed to a particularly disturbing post from 2007. This user, Shadowcrawl, talks about the ghost of Da Nang, a legend among the tunnel rats. Someone who went deeper, stayed longer, became more monster than man. Someone who could move through those tunnels like a spirit, inflicting unimaginable terror, silent as death itself. Silas's eyes narrowed. Da Nang. And the message, the rat remembers. Tunnel rat. A ghost. He turned to Kiana. Find out who Art really is, and find out what connection Da Nang has to the current situation. I want to know everything about the ghost. Meanwhile, across the city, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Her grandfather hadn't returned. His phone went straight to voicemail. The worry was a physical weight in her chest, pressing down on her lungs. She found herself back in his study, drawn to the old mahogany desk, a relic in itself. He had always been so private. His past a tapestry woven with too many frayed threads and missing patches. But now it felt less like privacy and more like concealment. Her fingers traced the ornate carvings of the desk, searching. Beneath a loose panel, hidden expertly, she found them. A worn, leather-bound journal and a rolled-up canvas map, brittle with age. The journal felt heavy, imbued with unspoken secrets, each scuff and worn edge a testament to a life lived in shadow. Its pages were filled with her grandfather's familiar, elegant script, but often fragmented, almost delirious in places. August 68. The smell of earth and fear. Always the fear. Not mine. There's my job. To instill it. To become it. The darkness breathes, and I am its lungs. They taught us to be rats, but rats scurry. We learned to glide, to vanish, to whisper terror without a sound. Maya swallowed, her heart pounding. This wasn't the gentle storyteller of her childhood. The man whose hands were stained with garden soil, not blood. She flipped pages, catching glimpses of crude, detailed sketches of narrow tunnels, dark figures, symbols she didn't recognize. One entry, scrawled in urgent, jagged lines, stood out. They call us ghosts now. The VC, they whisper it. We move in their darkness, but it has begun to move in us. The mission changed. Not just destroy but silence. Forever. The others, they broke. I learned to thrive. Danong. The source. The thing they wanted to hide most. The children. The word children slammed into her. A cold fist to the gut. What did that mean? What did he do? The implication was a black void opening beneath her feet. She unrolled the map with trembling hands. It was a topographical map of the Danong region, marked with faded red and blue lines and intricate symbols. A complex network of tunnels was highlighted, far more extensive than anything she'd ever seen in history books. At its center, a single blood-red X, labeled simply, the nest. Another journal entry, tucked between the map and the journal itself, slipped free. It was not her grandfather's hand, but a more formal, almost clinical script, stained with what looked like dried blood. Project Orpheus Report, classified, eyes only. Subject 734, codename Art, has shown remarkable adaptability to extreme psychological stressors. Post-mission psychoanalysis indicates a complete integration of the ghost persona. Unwavering loyalty to the mission parameters. Successfully eradicated all targets within designated nest area. Primary objective confirmed. The eradication of the Shadow Children program, a bioweapon experiment utilizing child soldiers. All traces eliminated. Subject 734 is an asset, but highly volatile. Recommend indefinite Black Ops deployment or complete disappearance. Danong is clean. Maya's breath hitched, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Shadow Children? Bioweapon experiment? The words spun in her head, grotesque and unbelievable. Her grandfather, the gentle man who taught her to plant roses and build sandcastles, was Subject 734? A ghost who eradicated all targets. Children. The report's cold. Official language only made the horror more potent. Her eyes scanned the map, then back to the blood-stained report. The red X on the map, the nest, suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning. It wasn't just a tunnel network. It was a grave. And her grandfather, Art, was the one who dug it. A cold dread, far deeper than any previous worry, settled over her. She gripped the journal. The reality of her grandfather's terrifying past now undeniable, shattering her world with each cryptic, bloody word. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images forming in her mind, the darkness, the screams, the terrifying silence that followed. But then she opened them again, drawn to one last, chilling detail on the map. A small, faint symbol beside the nest, barely visible. A stylized viper striking. Silas Thorne. The vipers. Maya gasped, the air catching in her throat, her blood turning to ice. The symbol on the map. The street gang terrorizing the city. Her grandfather, the rat, attacking them. Couldn't be a coincidence. The echoes of Danong weren't just in her grandfather's mind. They were here, now, reaching out from the grave of the past to strangle the present. And she, Maya, was standing directly in their path, caught between a monster and a ghost. Silas Thorne, a man whose patience was as thin as a razor's edge when his empire was threatened, watched the monitors in his opulent penthouse with predatory intensity. The digital map of Danong glowed, a constellation of red dots representing his vipers, converging on the city's decrepit underbelly. The old man had become a personal affront, a ghost from a past Silas believed buried, now clawing its way back to haunt him. Locate him. Don't engage without overwhelming force. Silas's voice was a low growl, devoid of his usual polished charm. Bring me his head. Or, better yet, bring him to me alive. Jigsaw, his second-in-command, a man whose face was a patchwork of scar tissue and dark tattoos, nodded, a grim smile twisting his lips. Consider him filleted, boss. We've got 24 of our best. He's old, tired. These tunnels are a tomb for him, not us. Silas didn't reply, his eyes fixed on the moving dots. Arrogance. It was a viper trait he usually nurtured. But now, a flicker of unease danced in his gut. The old man, Art, had proven to be anything but predictable. He had moved like a phantom through Danong's hidden arteries for decades, even when the city thought him long dead. Down in the suffocating labyrinth beneath Danong, the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like stale blood. A squad of vipers, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the grime-caked walls, moved with practiced caution, flashlights carving shaky paths through the oppressive gloom. The disused tunnel network was a tangled knot of forgotten storm drains, collapsed bunkers from bygone wars, and raw sewage conduits. It was the city's dark, forgotten heart, a place where the living rarely ventured, and the dead rarely left. "This is a joke," grumbled a viper named Razor, his voice echoing unnaturally. "An old man? We're chasing a ghost story." Jigsaw, leading the column, held up a hand. "Keep it down. This isn't your usual turf. The boss wants this one clean." He scanned the crumbling concrete, the tangled rebar, the stagnant pools reflecting their own anxious faces. There was an unnerving silence here, broken only by their own heavy breathing and the drip-drip-drip of unseen water. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine sliced through the quiet, vibrating through the very soles of their boots. It wasn't loud, but it was insistent, a sound that grated on their nerves, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Flashlights swung wildly, cutting through the shadows, but found nothing. "What the hell was that?" Razor hissed, his bravado gone. "Electromagnetic interference," Jigsaw muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew the Viper's gear was shielded. This was something else. A subtle shift in the air, a breath of movement in the periphery of vision, made the hairs on his neck stand on end. A sudden jarring crack echoed from ahead. A section of the ceiling, weakened by time and neglect, gave way, showering the lead Viper with dust and loose debris. He stumbled, his helmet light flickering erratically, and before he could regain his footing, a shadowy figure materialized from the collapsing dust cloud. A glint of steel, a choked gasp, and the Viper slumped to the ground, a blade protruding from his throat. The figure vanished as swiftly as it appeared, melting back into the darkness before the others could react. "Contact!" Jigsaw roared, raising his weapon. "Fall back! Form a perimeter!" Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of their professionalism. They were trained for street brawls, for the open, brutal confrontations of the city. This was different. This was being hunted in the dark, in a place that seemed to actively conspire against them. A metallic clang resonated from a side tunnel, followed by a rush of water. A pipe, ruptured by an unseen hand, burst, sending a torrent of sewage and fetid water gushing into their path. They scrambled, cursing, through the ankle-deep sludge, their movements slowed, their senses overwhelmed by the stench. "He's messing with us," another Viper, Snake Eyes, spat, his voice trembling. "Playing games." From the darkness, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper snaked around them. It wasn't words, just a series of drawn-out, guttural sounds, a mimicry of their own fear. It was the sound of a predator enjoying its hunt. A tripwire, cleverly concealed beneath the scummy water, snagged Razor's ankle. He went down hard, his flashlight spiraling away into the gloom. Before he could cry out, a hand, shockingly strong and swift, clamped over his mouth. He thrashed, trying to fight, but the grip was iron. A quick, brutal twist, and his neck snapped with a sickening wet crunch. The attacker was gone, taking Razor's weapon, leaving only the sound of the churning water and the chilling echo of the whisper. The Vipers were falling apart. Their formation dissolved into a huddled, terrified mass. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every creak of the old infrastructure a precursor to another attack. Jigsaw, his face a mask of primal fear, barked orders into his comms, but the signal was weak, distorted by the depth of the tunnels. "He's here. He's picking us off," Jigsaw screamed, his voice raw. "Fall back. Retreat." They bolted, splashing through the sewage, their flashlights dancing wildly, revealing nothing but crumbling walls and their own terrified reflections. Jigsaw, his breath ragged, brought up the rear, his heart pounding against his ribs. He felt a desperate urge to look over his shoulder, but dared not take his eyes off the path ahead. A figure emerged from the blackness, not behind them, but ahead, blocking their escape route. It was Art, or what was left of him. His form was skeletal, ancient, his clothes ragged, but in his eyes burned an infernal, calculating fire. He wasn't just old. He was ancient, a creature of the dark, a relic given new, terrifying purpose. He held a stolen viper tactical knife, its blade glinting ominously. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a silent declaration of war, a living manifestation of vengeance. The remaining vipers, barely a handful now, screamed, firing wildly. But the narrow tunnel, the echoing shots, and the sheer terror overwhelmed them. Art moved with impossible speed, a blur in the darkness, parrying a shot, deflecting another, then striking. A blur of motion, a gurgle, and another viper dropped. Jigsaw, abandoning his squad, scrambled through a narrow crawl space, convinced he could outrun the nightmare. He squeezed through the cramped passage, scraping his elbows and knees, propelled by a fear he hadn't known since childhood. He could hear the screams fading behind him, then nothing but his own ragged gasps. He emerged into a slightly larger cavern, his chest heaving, his flashlight beam revealing a dead end. A solid concrete wall. Trapped. He whirled around, his weapon raised, his eyes wide with stark terror. The cavern was silent. Too silent. The air grew colder. He felt a presence, a breath on his neck, but saw nothing. "Come out, you bastard!" Jigsaw shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll kill you. I'll skin you alive." His words were met by a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to ripple from the very stones around him. It was a sound of ancient, pitiless amusement. Then a sudden, blinding flash, a trip flare, ignited from behind him. Jigsaw screamed, his eyes burning, his vision momentarily obliterated. He staggered backward, his arms flailing, and his foot slipped. He plunged into an unseen chasm, a narrow, jagged fissure in the floor. He landed hard, his leg twisting beneath him with an audible snap. Pain exploded through him, but it was the terror of the darkness, of knowing he was there, that truly paralyzed him. He heard movement above him, a silhouette against the dying flare. Art. He looked down, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, devoid of mercy. "No, please no," Jigsaw pleaded, his voice reduced to a pathetic whimper, a sound Silas Thorne would never have believed possible from his enforcer. Art merely watched, a silent specter. Then, with a deliberate, unhurried motion, he raised the stolen viper knife. The flare cast dancing shadows, briefly illuminating the blade, then plunging Jigsaw into absolute darkness again. His screams, a raw, primal expression of ultimate despair, echoed for what felt like an eternity, bouncing off the damp stone walls, until they were abruptly, brutally cut short. A final, gurgling gasp and then only silence. The silence of the dead. Back in his penthouse, Silas Thorne received the package. It was a simple, unmarked courier box. He opened it slowly, his brow furrowed with mild annoyance. Inside, nestled on a bed of ice, was Jigsaw's right hand, severed cleanly at the wrist, still wearing his distinctive viper ring. Silas stared at it, his face paling, the color draining from his lips. The ring, the tattoos, unmistakable. Jigsaw, dead. Not just dead, but mutilated. A message carved in flesh and bone. The arrogant smirk, the confident bravado he'd seen hours earlier on Jigsaw's face, flashed through his mind. A cold, horrifying realization dawned on Silas. He hadn't sent his hunters after an old man. He had sent them into the lair of a ghost, a creature honed by decades of shadow and blood. And that ghost had just sent him a terrifying, undeniable warning. The hunted had become the hunter, and Silas Thorne, for the first time in years, felt a genuine chill of fear crawl up his spine. The echoes of Danong were not just whispering from the past. They were screaming, and they had a body count to prove it. The air in the makeshift dungeon smelled of damp earth, stale concrete, and a faint, metallic tang that bespoke of recent violence. Hung by his wrists from a rough-hewn beam, the young viper operative, barely out of his 20s, whimpered softly. His eyes, swollen slits in a face already beginning to purple, darted frantically through the gloom, searching for the source of his terror. There was no theatrical lighting, no overt torture instruments, just Art. Art stood in the shadows, a specter barely visible, his presence an oppressive weight in the cramped space. He wasn't yelling, wasn't threatening in broad strokes. Instead, his voice was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of the captive's bones. "Your name is Kai," Art began, his voice devoid of inflection. "You joined the Vipers 3 years ago. You mostly run shipments, but last night you were part of the backup team for a snatch-and-grab operation that went sideways. Very sideways." Kai flinched, a tremor running through his suspended body. "I don't know anything," he croaked, his throat raw. Art stepped into a sliver of weak light filtering from a great high above. His face, etched with decades of hard living, was a mask of cold efficiency. His eyes, however, held a depth that Kai couldn't fathom, a weariness that bordered on ancient. "You were a witness to Jigsaw's failure, to his dismemberment," Art continued, the word delivered with a surgical precision that made Kai's stomach clench. "Your fear is rational. Your silence, however, is a luxury you cannot afford." He moved closer, not threateningly, but with a deliberate, almost graceful pace that was far more unnerving than any sudden lunge. "Silas Thorne. He's the architect of this little empire, isn't he? The Viper at the top of the food chain." Kai shook his head weakly, tears welling in his eyes. "I swear, I only met him once. He's untouchable." Art sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He reached into his pocket, extracting a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb. He turned it over and over, his gaze distant, lost in a memory. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and gunpowder. The monsoon had passed, leaving behind a steaming, verdant hell. Private Miller, barely 18, stumbled, his M16 clattering against a patty dike. Art, then a young captain, pulled him up by the collar. "Stay low, Miller. Keep your eyes open." A child's cry, thin and reedy, pierced the humid air. Art froze. A thatched hut, partially collapsed, smoke curling from its splintered beams. A small, wooden bird lay in the mud at his feet. A flicker of movement. Another child, just a toddler, staring wide-eyed at the chaos, holding a doll made of rags. "Hostiles! West Ridge!" Sergeant Reyes screamed, his voice ripped apart by the stutter of an AK-47. Art's comms crackled. "Captain Hayes, we have a clear shot at the primary target, but collateral is high. Civilians in the sector. What's your call?" His eyes darted from the innocent child to the tactical map in his mind. The target, a high-value Viet Cong commander, orchestrating supply lines that were bleeding his men dry. One shot, one chance to cripple their operations for months. The child. The mission. The war. Execute. Art's voice was a flat, unyielding command. Execute now. The world exploded. The distant roar of an artillery strike. The ground shook. Dust, splinters, screams. The wooden bird, still in his hand, seemed to thrum with the vibration. He never saw the child again. Only the smoke and the silence that followed. Art blinked, the memory fading like a phantom limb. He looked at Kai, the wooden bird still clutched in his hand. "Silence," he murmured, "can be a choice, or it can be a consequence. Which do you prefer?" Kai was trembling uncontrollably now, not just from the cold or the pain in his wrists, but from the chilling aura emanating from the old man. He wants something. Something from Da Nang. A ghost. He calls it Operation Ghost Rat. Says it'll give him leverage, make him untouchable. Art's eyes, which had held that ancient weariness, sharpened with predatory focus. Leverage for what? Against whom? Against the men who made him, Kai gasped, desperation making him blurt out the words. The ones who discarded him. He wants to expose them. He thinks you can lead him to the proof. The truth about Da Nang. The mention of the ghost triggered another flicker in Art's eyes. A ghost of a different kind. The river ran red, not with blood, but with the rich, ochre earth churned by heavy rains. Villagers, their faces a mixture of fear and bewildered sorrow, stood amidst the ruins of their homes. A young, American officer, not much older than Art, was trying to explain, his voice hoarse, his uniform smeared with mud. "We had no choice. He was using your village as cover. A human shield," the officer pleaded, gesturing wildly towards the smoldering remains of a bunker. "This was a tactical necessity." An old woman, her face a web of wrinkles, wailed, holding a tattered child's garment. Her eyes, filled with an ancient grief, met Art's. He saw accusation, condemnation, a searing judgment that branded itself onto his soul. He had ordered the strike. He had made the call. He had saved his men, achieved the objective. And he had sacrificed everything else. The wooden bird dropped from Art's fingers, landing silently on the concrete floor. He stared at Kai, but his gaze seemed to penetrate beyond the young man, into the dark recesses of his own past. Operation Ghost Rat, he repeated, the words a bitter taste on his tongue. So he knows. Miles away, in her temporary data fortress, Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. The name Operation Ghost Rat had been a whisper, a phantom in the Viper's intercepted comms, a clue too tantalizing to ignore. Her search had been relentless, digging through layers of digital dust, bypassed firewalls, and archived intelligence. She started with public records, newspaper archives, declassified military reports, university studies on the Vietnam War. Then, she moved to the deeper, darker corners. Old CIA databases, hacked government servers, whistleblower leaks. She found nothing explicit under Operation Ghost Rat. It was too specific, too obscure. But she found mentions, cryptic references in heavily redacted CIA field reports from the late 60s, early 70s. Pattern began to emerge. Strategic objectives achieved in Sector 4, Da Nang region. Unavoidable collateral damage reported. Civilian population affected. Commander's discretion upheld under extreme duress. Mission success paramount. Intelligence suggests enemy leadership neutralized, but local resentment high following incident. Recommend reevaluation of rules of engagement regarding populated areas. She cross-referenced these with contemporary news clippings. A Vietnamese newspaper from 1971, translated clumsily by an online tool, reported on the tragedy of My Lai village. A name that sent a chill down her spine, but this was a different incident, a lesser-known one. Local authorities confirm numerous civilian casualties following intense firefight and subsequent cleanup operation by American forces near Da Nang. Reports of women and children among the dead. U.S. military cites hostile fire, denies culpability for all losses. Maya's stomach churned. This wasn't the heroic narratives she grew up with. This was a dark, morally gray stain. She narrowed her search, looking for commanding officers in the region, in that specific time frame with Special Reconnaissance Unit affiliations. A name jumped out, Captain Arthur Hayes, her grandfather. His service record was impeccable, decorated with medals for valor and strategic brilliance. But then a gap, a 6-month period unaccounted for, followed by a sudden, unexpected transfer to a non-combat intelligence role. No explanation given. His file for that period was stamped, highly classified, with a dozen redactions, whole paragraphs blacked out. She zoomed in on the redacted sections, using advanced image processing to try and peer through the digital ink. Most remained stubbornly opaque, but one faint trace, a ghost of text, shimmered on her screen. Authorized Ghost Rat Protocol direct impact on civilian settlement decision made under imperative for avoid further compromise. Her breath hitched. Ghost Rat. Maya leaned back, her chair scraping against the floor. The glowing screens cast an eerie light on her face, highlighting the dawning horror in her eyes. Her grandfather, the man who had taught her about integrity, about protecting the innocent, about the unwavering moral compass. He was a war hero, a decorated veteran, a legend in her family. But these fragmented records, these whispered accusations from history, painted a picture of something else entirely. A ruthless pragmatism, a cold calculation, the deliberate sacrifice of innocent lives for a military objective. The tragedy of My Lai village, but this time it seemed her own grandfather might have been behind his own such tragedy, albeit one buried under layers of secrecy and denial. Her hand trembled as she picked up the framed photograph on her desk. Art, younger, impossibly strong, wearing his uniform, his gaze steady and proud. Now that proud gaze seemed to hold a different truth, a silent accusation from the past. The hero she adored, the man who was currently risking everything to save her, was he also the man who had ordered unthinkable acts? The foundation of her world, her perception of him, began to crack, sending shards of agonizing doubt through her heart. The truth, or what she now believed to be the truth, was not just controversial. It was devastating. And it had come from the man she loved most. The photograph slipped from Maya's trembling fingers, clattering softly against the polished oak of her desk. Art, young, resolute, the hero of her childhood stories, now felt like a stranger. The pride she'd always felt, the unwavering belief in his moral compass, had fractured into a kaleidoscope of doubt and dread. Ghost Rat. The name echoed, a chilling counterpoint to the lullaby of his integrity she'd been raised on. The fragmented records didn't just hint at a controversial past. They screamed of a deliberate, cold-blooded efficiency that sacrificed lives, not saved them. She pushed back from the desk, the scraping chair a desperate attempt to create distance from the screen's accusatory glow. The room, usually a sanctuary of research and intellectual pursuit, now felt like a trap, the walls closing in, pressing the weight of her grandfather's hidden history down upon her. How could the man who taught her the sacred duty of protecting the vulnerable, who had patiently explained the inherent nobility of self-sacrifice, also be the architect of such calculated destruction? The hero and the executioner warring within the same skin. Her head pounded, the blood roaring in her ears, drowning out the distant city hum. She needed air. She needed clarity. Stumbling to the window, she wrenched it open, the sudden rush of cool night air doing little to dispel the suffocating realization. Her world had not merely shifted on its axis. It had been utterly upended. The truth, or what she now believed to be the truth, was not just controversial. It was devastating. And it had come from the man she loved most. A sudden, sharp pain exploded at the base of her skull, a blinding white flash. The world tilted, the night sky spinning into a vortex of distorted light and shadow. A metallic tang filled her mouth, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the blurred outline of a figure, too close, too silent, a phantom of the very darkness she had been researching. Detective Miller slapped a palm against the whiteboard, the dry erase marker squeaking as he circled another name. Another one, Jose Mendez, dumped in the river just like the others. Clean shot to the head. No witnesses, no forensics, not really, just gone. His partner, Detective Ramirez, leaned against the doorframe, a weary sigh escaping him. This isn't just a gang war, Frank. Gangs don't operate with this kind of precision. No messy shootouts, no territorial markings. It's like someone's systematically pruning the criminal underground, one boss at a time. Exactly, Miller grunted, scanning the growing web of names and affiliations. And every one of them had ties to that syndicate, the one we thought disappeared with Elias Thorne. Someone's bringing it back, or someone's dismantling it piece by piece. But who? And why? The department was stretched thin, resources diverted to the high-profile drug busts and petty street crimes that plagued the city. This escalating gang war, with its grim efficiency and mounting body count, was an anomaly. They were reacting, always reacting, sifting through the aftermath, but they were still several steps behind, chasing ghosts in the concrete labyrinth. The thought that an old, retired plumber might be at the heart of it all was too absurd to even consider. The vibration of his burner phone jolted Art from his meticulous ritual of cleaning a set of antique plumbing tools. He'd been working in the solitude of his basement, the scent of oil and metal grounding him, a faint smell of disinfectant clinging to his hands from the last fix he'd performed. It was the only thing that kept the frantic thoughts at bay, the gnawing worry for Maya. He picked it up, his thumb hovering over the answer icon. An unknown number. He knew, with a primal certainty that chilled him to the bone, what this was. He tapped it. The screen flickered, then resolved into a live video feed. Art's breath hitched, the antique wrench slipping from his grasp, clattering loudly on the concrete floor. Maya. She was slumped against a cold, brick wall, her eyes fluttering, a strip of duct tape covering her mouth. Her hair, usually so meticulously styled, was matted, and a dark bruise bloomed on her temple. She was alive, but the terror in her wide, unfocused eyes was a silent scream. Then a voice, smooth as polished obsidian, yet laced with the venom of a cobra, filled the room. Hello, Art. Or should I say, Ghost Rat? Art's jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the grimy phone. Silas. Surprised? You shouldn't be. You hurt my family, Art. You took everything from me. Now, I'm merely returning the favor. The camera pans slightly, revealing Silas himself, standing over Maya, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He was impeccable even here in what looked like some derelict underground chamber. Your granddaughter, such a brilliant young woman, and so close to uncovering your secrets, wasn't she? Oh, I know. I've been watching. Fascinating. A hero by day, a butcher by night. Tell me, Art, does she know the truth about my lie? About the other my lie? Art felt a cold wave wash over him. A deep, ancient fury rising from the abyss he'd buried decades ago. The old plumber, the man who fixed pipes and played chess, evaporated like mist in a scorching desert. The air in the basement grew heavy, charged with a palpable menace. She doesn't deserve this, Silas, Art said, his voice a low growl, stripped of all pleasantries, all pretense. It was the voice of a man who had seen hell and lived there. Silas chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Deserve? We don't get what we deserve, Art. We get what we take. And I'm taking her. Unless you come for her. The camera zoomed in on Maya's face again. A tear tracked a path through the dust on her cheek. Her eyes met Art's through the screen. A desperate plea for rescue, mingled with a new, horrifying understanding of who he truly was. The accusation in her gaze was a final, agonizing twist of the knife. One day, Art. Tomorrow at dawn. Come to the old water treatment plant, Sector 7. Alone. Surrender to me and she lives. Fail to appear or bring anyone else, and I'll send you a piece of her every hour, starting with her fingers, until there's nothing left but a memory. Silas's voice hardened. And then, I'll disappear back into the shadows, leaving you with only that memory and the ghost of your past. The video cut out, leaving Art staring at a blank screen, the chilling silence echoing in the vast emptiness of his soul. Surrender. That was a lie. Silas wanted blood, his blood. He wanted Art to suffer, to watch his loved ones die, just as Art had once made him watch. Art's eyes, once kind and weary, sharpened, hardening into chips of obsidian. The tremor in his hands vanished, replaced by a terrifying stillness. The last vestiges of the old plumber, the man who had sought peace and anonymity, had been incinerated in the furnace of his fury. The ghost had resurfaced. He moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency. His hands, no longer arthritic, expertly reached for the false bottom of a tool chest, revealing not wrenches and pipes, but a carefully oiled, silenced Sig Sauer P226. Next to it lay a combat knife, its blade honed to a razor's edge, and a small, antique map, brittle with age. It depicted the forgotten arteries of the city, the defunct tunnels, the abandoned storm drains, the subterranean network that snaked beneath the unsuspecting metropolis, a dark, sprawling domain only he knew intimately. He slipped the pistol into a custom holster, the knife into a sheath on his belt. The map was folded precisely and tucked into an inner pocket. His face was a mask of grim determination, his mind a cold, calculating machine. Silas wanted to play in the shadows? Art would drag him into the deepest, darkest parts of them. He would lure Silas into his domain, the forgotten city beneath their feet, a place where the rules of the surface world held no sway, a place where only the predator survived. Maya was his, and the ghost of Danang was coming for her. The air thickened with a stench that clawed at the back of Silas's throat. A putrid cocktail of ancient damp earth, stagnant water, and something else, something cloyingly sweet and metallic, like old blood. His flashlight beam, a feeble finger in the suffocating black, danced across slick, sweating brick walls, then plummeted into the inky depths of a rushing underground river. The current below was a monstrous whisper, promising to drag anything caught in its grip into oblivion. Spread out, Silas barked, his voice losing its usual authority, swallowed by the echoing vastness. His 30 men, once a confident legion, now shuffled nervously, their heavy weapons seeming less like instruments of power and more like cumbersome anchors in this subterranean nightmare. They were descending into the city's forgotten circulatory system, a labyrinth of disused sewage tunnels, defunct storm drains, and ancient, forgotten catacombs, a place where concrete gave way to crumbling stone, where the very air was a hostile entity. The first scream wasn't human. It was the high-pitched shriek of metal shearing, followed by a sickening crunch. Ramirez, a hulking viper known for his reckless bravery, had stepped on a pressure plate disguised beneath a thin film of grit. A rusted grate, perfectly balanced, swung down with the force of a guillotine, severing his leg above the knee. His guttural roar of agony was cut short by the thwack of another unseen mechanism. A thick, greasy chain whipping around his neck, dragging his thrashing body into the blackness of a side passage. Silas spun, his automatic rifle spitting a panicked burst of fire into the void where Ramirez had been. Nothing. Only the receding echoes and the wet, gurgling sound of a body being pulled through murky water. Fear, a cold, reptilian dread, began to coil in his gut. This wasn't a hunt. It was an execution, and they were the prey. "Stay together. Don't split up," he roared, his command laced with desperation. But Art, the phantom puppet master, had already set the stage. The darkness was his ally, the tunnels his weapon. He didn't fight fair, he fought to kill. A low, mocking chuckle seemed to emanate from the very walls, a sound that pricked the skin and vibrated in the bones. It was the ghost. A sudden, earth-shaking rumble reverberated through the tunnel. Ahead, a section of the ceiling groaned, then collapsed with a roar of pulverized rock and dirt, blocking the main passage. 3 more vipers, caught in the avalanche of debris, were instantly crushed, their dying cries muffled by the deluge. Panic erupted. Men scrambled backwards, tripping over each other, their flashlights dancing wildly, painting frantic streaks of terror on the slimy walls. "He's blocking us in," one viper shrieked, his voice cracking. "Find another way," Silas snarled, shoving the man forward. He pointed to a narrower, auxiliary pipe running parallel to the main tunnel, barely wide enough for one person. It reeked of methane and decay. Through there, hesitantly, his remaining men began to squeeze into the foul-smelling pipe. Silas, last in line, cursed the claustrophobia that seized him. This was not a battlefield for men like him, men who wielded power in sunlit streets. This was a nightmare. Inside the pipe, the air grew thick and cloying, pressing in from all sides. Each breath was a struggle against the stench of raw sewage and something chemical. Suddenly, the lead viper screamed, a choked, wet sound, and then went silent. His flashlight clattered, rolling back, its beam catching a grotesque sight. A razor-sharp wire strung waist-high across the pipe, neatly bisecting the viper's torso. His lower half slid back, hitting the next man in line, while his upper body remained impaled. "Ambush!" a voice cried, followed by a frantic burst of gunfire that ricocheted deafeningly off the curved pipe walls. The shots found no target, but instead fragmented the lead viper's already mangled body into a bloody spray. Art was using their own fear, their own weapons, against them. He was turning their numbers into a liability, making them targets for friendly fire, making them drown in their own terror. The ghost of Danong wasn't a myth. He was a living, breathing nightmare. Silas felt a primal scream bubbling in his chest. He wanted to rip the man apart with his bare hands. He pushed forward, crawling over the grisly remains of his men, his hands slipping on viscera. He could hear the dwindling number of footsteps ahead, the frantic whispers, the sporadic, desperate gunfire. Then silence, utter, terrifying silence. He emerged from the pipe into a wider chamber, a vast, echoing cavern that must have once been a forgotten reservoir. Stalactites hung like skeletal fingers from the ceiling, reflecting the sporadic flashes of lightning that occasionally illuminated a grate far above, hinting at the stormy world outside. In the center, perched precariously on a raised platform, was a single dim lantern, and beside it, kneeling, was Maya. She was bound, gagged, her eyes wide with terror, but alive, her gaze locked with Silas's, a desperate plea in their depths. "Maya!" Silas roared, relief and rage warring within him. He started towards her, his boots splashing through the shallow water covering the chamber floor. Click. The sound, barely audible above the distant rumble of the storm, froze Silas in his tracks. From the shadows behind Maya, Art emerged. He stood tall, the Sig Sauer held loosely in his hand, its suppressor a dark, menacing cylinder. But it wasn't the gun that truly terrified Silas. It was Art's face, gaunt, streaked with mud and water. His eyes glowed with an ancient, predatory fury. There was no flicker of the old plumber, no hint of the man who had lost everything. This was the ghost, resurrected, lethal, and utterly devoid of mercy. Silas. Art's voice was a low growl, devoid of inflection, a sound honed by years of silence and bottled rage. You wanted to watch me suffer, to watch my loved ones die, just as I watched yours. He gestured towards Maya with a tilt of his head. Here she is. Your prize. My punishment. Silas raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. You think this changes anything, old man? You're still alone. My men are dead. Art finished, his gaze unwavering. All of them, drowned, crushed, bled out in the dark. Your grand army reduced to refuse in my sewers. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Just you and me now, Silas. The way it should be. Silas didn't hesitate. He opened fire, a torrent of lead ripping through the air towards Art. But the ghost was already moving, a blur of motion in the dim light. He dove behind a crumbling support pillar, the Sig Sauer spitting a single silenced shot that pinged off Silas's rifle stock, jarring his aim. Coward! Silas screamed, emptying his clip into the pillar. He fumbled for a fresh magazine, his hands shaking. Art didn't return fire. He emerged from behind the pillar, not with his gun, but with the combat knife glinting wickedly in his hand. He moved with a terrifying grace, a ghost blurring through the shadows, closing the distance between them with impossible speed. Silas barely had time to slot the new magazine before Art was on him, a whirlwind of fists and steel. The knife flashed, a silver arc aimed at Silas's throat. Silas managed to parry with his rifle, the blade scraping harshly against the barrel. Art twisted, a foot sweeping out, sending Silas stumbling into the murky water. The rifle clattered from his grasp, sinking into the depths. Now it was truly hand-to-hand. No guns, no elaborate traps, just two men, driven by years of hatred, in a primal struggle. Silas, bigger, stronger, roared and lunged, throwing a clumsy punch that Art effortlessly evaded. Art moved like water, flowing around Silas's brute force, his every movement economical, deadly. He jabbed a knee into Silas's groin, then slammed an elbow into his temple. Silas staggered, blood blooming at his hairline. You took everything from me, Art snarled, his voice raw with pure, unadulterated venom. My family, my peace, my name. He connected with another brutal punch, driving Silas back against the cold, damp wall of the reservoir. Silas gasped, shaking his head to clear the fog. His eyes found Maya, still bound on the platform, watching with wide, terrified eyes. He had to win. With a roar of renewed fury, Silas grabbed Art, leveraging his greater weight, and slammed him against the wall. He found Art's throat, his powerful fingers closing around it, cutting off his air. Art clawed at his hands, his face turning purplish. Silas grinned, a gruesome, blood-splattered rictus. The ghost is just an old man, Silas wheezed, tightening his grip. And old men die. But Art wasn't done. His eyes, burning with a furious, impossible light, met Silas's. With a sudden, desperate surge of strength, he brought his knee up, ramming it into Silas's groin with sickening force. Silas bellowed, his grip momentarily loosening. It was all Art needed. He twisted, breaking free, and landed a brutal headbutt that snapped Silas's head back against the stone. Silas sagged, disoriented. Art didn't pause. He grabbed Silas's head, slammed it into the wall once, twice, 3 times, each impact echoing sickeningly in the vast chamber. Silas slumped, unconscious or perhaps something worse. Art stared down at the crumpled form of his nemesis, his chest heaving, his body screaming in protest. The rage still burned, but beneath it, a chilling emptiness began to seep in. He had won. Silas was defeated. He turned, his eyes finding Maya. She was still there, still bound, but a flicker of hope, or perhaps awe, softened the terror in her gaze. He took a step towards her, his body aching, his mind a maelstrom of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. Suddenly, a choked gasp ripped through the silence. Maya. Art spun back. Silas. He wasn't entirely out. With a surge of incredible last-ditch effort, he had somehow impossibly pushed himself up. His eyes were glazed, but fixed on Maya. He still clutched something in his hand, not a gun, but a jagged, broken piece of rebar, ripped from the crumbling wall. With a guttural roar, Silas lunged, not at Art, but at the platform where Maya lay helpless. His arm rose, the rebar glinting, aimed directly at her chest. No! Art roared, his voice tearing, but he was too far. The distance was too great. The rebar plunged downwards. Art's roar, ripped from his very soul, was a primal, desperate sound. He moved, not with the calculated grace of a veteran, but with the brute force of a cornered animal. Every muscle screamed, every joint protested, but he launched himself forward, a final impossible burst of adrenaline propelling him across the gap. He didn't make it to Maya. He didn't need to. He slammed into Silas's side with the full weight of his despair and fury, a last, desperate tackle. The impact was sickening, a dull thud that vibrated through Art's already shattered frame. Silas, already unsteady, reeled, the rebar clattering uselessly against the stone as it flew from his grasp. They tumbled, a grotesque embrace, over the edge of the platform. Art hit first, his head cracking against the uneven rock floor with a sickening jolt that sent a white-hot spear of pain through his skull. Silas landed on top of him, a dead weight, his body a twisted, broken thing. For a moment, there was only silence, a ringing in Art's ears, a throbbing behind his eyes, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. He lay pinned, Silas's limp form pressing down on him, the faint, acrid smell of burnt flesh and old fear filling his nostrils. Then a cough, a wet, rattling sound from Silas. Art's eyes, blurry and unfocused, snapped open. Silas, impossibly, was still alive. His head was turned, his gaze fixed on Art, a flicker of something monstrous and unyielding still burning in his pupils, even as a dark stain spread rapidly across his back. He gargled, a sound like gravel in a dying throat, and a gnarled hand, claw-like, began to twitch, reaching. No, not again. Not this time. A cold, absolute certainty settled over Art. This was it. The final act. There could be no doubt, no lingering threat. He would not leave Maya to a ghost of a ghost. With a superhuman effort, Art twisted, shoving Silas's inert form slightly to the side. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, found the fallen rebar. It was heavy, rough, stained with grim history. He gripped it, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning agony in his own flesh. Silas's eyes, still fixed on him, seemed to widen marginally, a flicker of comprehension, or perhaps just primal terror, crossing them as he saw the improvised weapon. His mouth opened, a silent, guttural plea, or perhaps a curse, escaping. Art didn't hesitate. He raised the rebar. He brought it down, once, twice, thrice. Each strike was a desperate, guttural grunt ripped from his own lungs. Each impact a sickening crunch that resonated through the damp stone and deep into Art's bone. He wasn't just killing a man. He was exorcising a demon, severing a tie that had bound him to this darkness for half a century. When he finally stopped, his arm frozen midair, Silas was still, truly still. The flickering light from the emergency lamps cast grotesque shadows, painting the scene in a horrifying tableau of red and black. Art pushed himself off Silas, every movement in agony. He crawled, dragging his broken body, back towards the platform where Maya lay. Her binds were still tight, but her gaze was fixed, not on Silas, but on him. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the gloom, held a terror he hadn't seen before, a horror that transcended her own captivity. It was for him, for what she had just witnessed him do. He reached the edge of the platform, grasping for purchase, his chest heaving, his breath ragged. He looked at her, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes hollow and ancient. In that moment, He saw the mirror of his own defeat in her gaze. He had saved her, yes, but he had also irrevocably broken something within her. He had shown her the true face of the darkness he had become. The first distant wail pierced the oppressive silence, a thin, rising siren. Then another and another, growing in intensity. They were close. The authorities. Art looked from Maya to the entrance of the chamber, then back to her. A silent conversation passed between them, a lifetime of unspoken words, of love and sacrifice and ultimate, brutal truth. He couldn't be found here. Not like this. He was the ghost now irrevocably. He had chosen his path, walked it to its bloody conclusion, and there was no turning back to the light. His justice, his peace, came at the cost of his own humanity, his own future. He reached out a trembling hand, not to touch her, but to sever the last, unseen thread between them. "Maya," he rasped, his voice raw and broken, a whisper lost to the rising sirens. It was an apology, a farewell, a prayer. Then, with a final, lingering look that spoke volumes of love and regret, Art turned. He disappeared into the intricate network of tunnels, a shadow swallowed by shadows, leaving behind the echoes of his violence and the ghost of a promise. Sergeant Miller was a veteran. 25 years on the force, most of them in narcotics and violent crimes. He'd seen horrors. He'd seen the worst of humanity. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the scene that unfolded before him as his team breached the entrance to the forgotten bunker beneath the old market. The air hit them first. A metallic tang of blood, the musty scent of decay, and something else, something primal and chilling that prickled the hairs on his neck. Emergency lights, powered by a sputtering generator, cast a sickly yellow glow over a vast, echoing chamber. Bodies, everywhere, not just 2 or 3, a dozen at least, scattered like discarded puppets, many bearing the telltale signs of brutal, close-quarters combat. A few of his men gagged, their faces paling under their tactical masks. The sheer scale of the violence, the visceral brutality, was overwhelming. "Clear!" came the shouted reports from the perimeter. No immediate threats. Miller moved deeper, his hand instinctively on his holstered weapon. His gaze swept over the carnage, his mind struggling to process the sheer, unadulterated savagery. This wasn't a shootout. It was an execution. A slaughter. A war had been fought down here, long after the world thought it had ended. Then he saw her. A young woman, bound to a stone altar, her eyes wide, vacant, staring into a space that held more horror than any battlefield. Her clothes were torn, her skin smudged with dirt and what looked like dried blood. But she was breathing, alive. "We have a survivor," Miller yelled, relief momentarily cutting through the grim tableau. "Medics, get over here." As his team carefully approached Maya, their flashlights danced over the last, most disturbing discovery. In the center of the chamber, near the raised platform, lay 2 more bodies. One, a massive, powerfully built man, his face a mask of contorted rage, his chest and head crushed beyond recognition by what looked like an iron bar. The other, an older, leaner man, partially obscured, but clearly lifeless. Silas Ng. Miller recognized the crime boss from intel photos. The other body was a mystery, though the destruction it had wrought was terrifyingly clear. "This is a battlefield, sir," one of his younger officers stammered, his voice thin. Miller just nodded, his gaze sweeping the complex network of tunnels branching off the main chamber. The one responsible for this carnage, for this final, brutal reckoning, was gone, vanished, like a ghost. Months later, the coastal wind whipped at Maya's hair, tugging at the loose fabric of her simple dress. The sun beat down on the beach, painting the waves in hues of sapphire and emerald, but she felt no warmth. The world had gone monochromatic for her, drained of its vibrant colors. She sat on the sand, her fingers tracing patterns in the grains, patterns that always seemed to coalesce into the labyrinthine tunnels, the flickering lights, the 2 faces, one a monster, the other a savior, a ghost. Her grandfather, Art, the man who had embraced the darkness, not for gain, but for her, for a twisted form of justice. The police investigation had stalled, then closed. There were no leads on the other man, the one responsible for the final massacre. No one had connected the dots. No one could. Art had vanished, a true phantasm of Da Nang, his intricate knowledge of the underground labyrinth swallowing him whole. He was alive. She knew it in her bones, living in quiet, anonymous exile, forever haunted by the violence he had wielded. She too was haunted, not by fear of Silas anymore. That fear had been replaced by a chilling emptiness, but by the image of her grandfather, broken and bloodied, raising that rebar, delivering death with a chilling finality. She understood why he had done it. She understood the desperation, the history, the legacy, but understanding didn't erase the scar. It etched it deeper. The legacy of the ghost of Da Nang was hers now, a complex tapestry of love and terror, protection and brutality. It was the price of her safety, the cost of her peace. A peace born of violence, a quiet world forged in the fires of a hidden war. She often wondered if it was worth it, this peace. She wondered if Art, wherever he was, found any solace in the justice he had wrought. The waves crashed, relentless, echoing the turmoil within her. The world moved on, oblivious to the hidden currents, the lingering darkness that flowed just beneath the surface, forever shaping her, forever reminding her of the true, profound price of belonging to a family that carried such a formidable, terrifying shadow. The ghost was gone, but its darkness remained, a silent, eternal presence in her soul.